was a time when we had a pastor who was new to being a pastor, and he was a charismatic and good preacher in a lot of ways, but he was telling us every Sunday about things that we need to do, basically. And it was hard to listen to those sermons without just focusing on how we were falling short and feeling God's judgment without getting that word that we always need to hear about how God loves us and we'll never measure up to those expectations. We're already loved in spite of that limitation that we'll always have. So my church, we're in the town of Rhinebeck, New York, and it's a really charming little town. And it's a very active, vibrant community, although not a very religious community. And one thing that I love about my church is that will always open our doors to the community and bring people in. For example, on Halloween, we open the doors and welcome the children in and basically give people the message that God loves them as they come for various events in the community. Yeah, well, I'm a teacher, so I teach high school math and physics, and I find that teaching is a profession where it's easy to focus on places where I fall short. And then also, as a teacher, I'm kind of a judge, and I'm constantly having to judge my students for their mistakes and so forth. But I find that I really find that my Christian faith informs my teaching a lot, both in how I treat myself in terms of when I make mistakes, and then also how I treat my students when they make mistakes. And I find that knowing that God loves me no matter what really informs both kind of my ability to carry on as a teacher even after I've fallen short in some way, but also in the way that I really feel every year that I love my students dearly, and I always feel that that's the love of God sort of coming through me, and I'm loving in them what God loves in them. I think the times when I catch myself not acting out of God's love are most often in habits I fall into with interactions with people I'm closest to, actually. It's easy to start to take people for granted, I think, when they're always there. My parents, for example, are wonderful. And it's just so easy when they're always there to start to take them for granted and to critique and criticize and lose sight of the fact that they're just as precious to God as I am. One Bible story that's always been meaningful to me is about the woman who lost the coin in her house, and she searched and searched and searched until she found the coin again. And the interpretation that I'm fondest of is that actually we're like the coin, and that God is the one who's searching for us, and that we're so precious to him that he won't let us fall away. He'll seek us out because of his overwhelming love for us. That also implies not only to the way I view myself, but also to that each one of us is that to God, someone that's very precious to him, and that he would search and search and search to seek out and not ever let fall through the cracks. Yeah, I think that I've had a tendency at certain points in my life more than others to really be relying on myself for my own worth and my own success, and to lose sight of the fact that I really don't have the resources within me to ever be the person that I want to be. And one time I felt that really strongly was when I started graduate school in physics, and it was very challenging. And I wasn't turning to God for help in that situation. I was just getting very, very depressed, basically, at how I wasn't measuring up. I wasn't following the lecture I just sat through. I remember once I went to a colloquium and I didn't understand the whole thing, and I just had to sit there for an hour, and I felt like everyone else in the room knew what was going on, and I didn't, and I came back to my office and I threw my keys against the wall, and I started to feel really worthless, actually. I have diary entries where I'm saying I feel like I'm, here, I'm not worth anything. I don't have what it takes, and I'm not measuring up, basically. And then I was trying to kind of pull myself out of that with my own language. Like, I know I'm not worthless. I know I'm great and wonderful and intelligent and all these things. And it was this kind of self-talk where I was trying to boost myself up. But it was hollow. It was just my words against the words that I saw being used to judge me from my academic program. It's funny because I lived in a little studio apartment then, which mostly just looked at like parking lots and other apartment buildings, but I could see the steeple of a cross actually through my window. And I would sit there at my desk and be working, and I would see that steeple. And I didn't go to church for some years at that point when I was in grad school. And then actually I realized it was a Lutheran church, and one day I did decide to wander in there, and I found a church community there, and actually even more importantly, I started to hear the gospel again in my ears at that point. And that helped me in a way that my own self-talk never could have helped. I mean, I've felt really swaddled in God's love for most of my life. It's something that I grew up with the great benefit of having. And sometimes I've wandered away from it a little, and I feel like it's just always been there, waiting to embrace me again. I think it's from 1 John, actually, and it's that when we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. I think a big part of how the gospel shapes my view of the world is this idea of God's love, and that when we love each other, it's participation in something divine. And that's something I think about a lot, and when I've heard that in church, it's felt like it's speaking directly to me. But I've learned more and more as I go through life how important God's love is to me as I move forward in life. In a way, it's something kind of like with taking the love of family and friends for granted. In a way, I think at sometimes I took the love of God a little bit for granted because it's so much a part of the worldview that I grew up with. And as I've gotten older, I've become more conscious of how important that love of God is to my view of the world, and it's something that I look forward to teaching to my children, for example, so that they can grow up knowing God's love for them and having it shape their view of the world also.